The question is that this bill be now read a second time. The member for Mallee.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I hear my colleague, the wonderful member for Newcastle, and the concerns that she has about the issue of misinformation and disinformation. And there is so much of what she says that I absolutely agree with. We are all concerned about our children, our grandchildren, our young adults who are not listening to good news, i.e. accurate news, and we have a responsibility in this place to get that right. However, we also have to make sure that there are not consequences that we didn't intend on by implementing legislation and passing it in this House. Our role on this side of the House is to ask the questions and to vote according to our priorities. Before I begin talking about the bill, which is about combating misinformation and disinformation, I want to talk about the misinformation being propagated by the national broadcaster, the ABC, because it is incredibly relevant to this bill. Exhibit A. The ABC broadcast in late August, early September, claims linking decades' use of paraquat and diquat herbicide to the incidence of Parkinson's disease in farmers. And the story portrayed a hotspot in my electorate of Mallee. I am not saying there isn't a Parkinson's hotspot or similar, and as Shadow Assistant Minister for Regional Health, the incidence of Parkinson's in my electorate concerns me greatly. If there is a causal link, then we want to get to the bottom of it. I have been advocating for years funding to support movement disorder nurses and support across Mallee at this point of time with no success. The facts are that there is no evidence there is a causal link to Parkinson's disease in the use of these chemicals, and the ABC portrayed historical practices as if they are occurring today. Currently, the APVMA is reviewing dosages of paraquat and diquat. I respect the independence of the APVMA, who were effectively also attacked by the ABC as being in the pocket of the chemicals companies. You can talk all you like about the editorial independence of the ABC, but they must put facts where their claims are, or they actually become a disreputable source of news, misinformation, if you like. Radio ratings certainly indicate that Australians are switching off the ABC. Significant reduction of paraquat dosage will mean a return to heavy tillage farming. This will radically impact the people in my electorate. It actually impacts the people in Sydney because you don't want mallee dust all over your town, your city. As Ron Hartz from Werrimal in my electorate told me, the low dosages being discussed are so low you might as well pee in the corner of the paddock. That's how much use it will be. Constituents and peak bodies are coming to me very concerned about this and very grateful for the motion I moved in the federal chamber this week on this topic. They are beyond dismayed at the ABC landline program on the issue. So much so, the APVMA issued a statement critical of the ABC making that connection and, most importantly, highlighted that we are talking about historical practices, such as the portrayal of a farmer ducking as a crop duster sprays chemicals over him as he applies chemicals on the farm. Nobody is suggesting children are being exposed to herbicides or farmers are being drenched in herbicides today because modern practices have changed. Sealed cabins and sealed systems for herbicide use are the norm. The representation by the ABC tried to link hard-working farmers and others from my electorate who are dealing with Parkinson's disease who are not making that direct link themselves. It was the editorialising by the ABC claiming the link that was sensationalist and arguably doling out misinformation. Exhibit B. Fake gunshots. When it comes to misleading use of footage or audio, of course we had the ABC and Senate estimates this week admitting it had added additional gunshots in footage of Australian troops in a helicopter deployed in Afghanistan in 2012. This is disgraceful behaviour on the part of the ABC. Exhibit C. And then we have a government official from the US state of Georgia last month who took issue over the ABC Four Corners program Misinformation about their Vogtle nuclear power plant, with the program host claiming the plant had not reduced power prices but put them up. But the Vice Chairman of the Georgia Public Service Commission, Tim Eccles, said the plant was not the primary source of rate increases and that the ABC's failure to mention other sources of price increases had amounted to misinformation. For instance, firstly, the amount of gas the USA has been shipping to Europe to help combat the flow of Russian gas. And secondly, the cost of new grid infrastructure to accommodate electricity generated from solar panels. It might relate to Australia. These are just a few examples where the ABC goes on an ideological crusade, putting the narrative ahead of the facts, then shaping the content to suit the narrative, or as some call it, fake news. The point is that if we are going to combat misinformation and spend $1 billion a year financing a public broadcaster, they have to get their facts right and not engage in misinformation themselves. Getting back to the bill, this is the Albanese Labor government's second attempt at regulating what people can and cannot say online. Their first attempt drew 20,000 submissions opposed to the proposal. The coalition campaigned to bin the bill, and that's where it ended up. The trouble is that Labor has done a dumpster dive to bring up a new bill that is worse than the first one. The bill comes late in a parliamentary term where this government has had plenty of time to get the settings right. They also have their anti-doxing and hate crime amendment bills before Parliament. I'm very concerned that sitting days are running out and this government may be readying the guillotine on this and even other bills when they are there are very serious implications to be considered in each. That is what debate is about. In this misinformation do-over, Act 2 if you like, the government ran a ridiculously short 7-day consultation process which minimised the number of submissions and objections that could actually be made. I can assure the House that Mallee constituents have been making many submissions to my inbox, this topic being the number one raised with me in recent months, given the government's ridiculously short timeline for so-called consultation. This bill is so bad that the coalition has already pledged to repeal the bill if it becomes law. The provisions of the bill are extremely broad and would capture many things said by Australians every day. Under the bill, the honestly held opinions of Australians can be deemed to be misinformation. Digital platforms are required to identify whether or not pieces of content are misinformation. The process of identifying this misinformation is highly subjective and will lead to the suppression of free speech of everyday Australians. Concern about religious freedom, faith leaders have united in protest at the attempt to have the government regulate what is reasonable religious belief as opposed to unreasonable. And this too is highly concerning. In other parts of the world, persecution of people of faith occurs because the government determines that certain beliefs, teachings or practices are contrary to government policy. We have criminal laws for people who commit criminal acts, even though we have seen a hole in the law recently when people held up flags or symbols of listed terrorist organisations. It's concerning that the government seems more focused on acting like religious police, deciding what is or isn't a reasonable religious belief, and turning a blind eye to promotion of terrorism through religious fundamentalism in Australia. The right to hold and communicate religious beliefs is one of the most fundamental in any democracy. Spirituality is the domain of the individual, not the state. We need government for many things. Determining whether our religious beliefs are reasonable is not one of them. The Albanese government's misinformation bill represents a clear and present danger to the open communication of religious beliefs in Australia. Remarkably, Mr Albanese and his Communications Minister, Michelle Rowland, want this bill to become the law of Australia by the end of the year. This just simply must not happen. There are many serious problems with this bill, but it is notable how many religious groups have zeroed in on the risks it represents to people of faith. The core problem is that the bill empowers digital platforms and government bureaucrats to determine whether a religious belief is reasonable. This point is well made in a submission on the bill by the combined faith leaders, representing a large number of faiths, including the Anglican, Presbyterian and Baptist churches and the Shia Muslim community. The submission notes that, and I quote, "Digital providers will be assessing whether the content of a religious belief is reasonable in determining whether or not it is misinformation." This is the same as saying that providers are empowered to determine whether the teaching is reasonable in itself. Everyday Australians are captured by this bill, but some groups are excluded from its operation. For instance, any reasonable dissemination of material for an academic, scientific or artistic purpose is excluded from the bill. But if an everyday Australian disagrees with an academic, then he or she will have committed the crime of misinformation. This is outrageous and creates two classes of speech in Australia, one for favoured groups, like academics, and one for everybody else. Here are a sample of the objections to the bill. The Victorian Bar Association stated, and I quote, "Speech about political, philosophical, artistic or religious topics often involves statements that are not straightforwardly factual, but which are not mere statements of subjective belief. Much scientific discourse involves the testing and rejection of hypotheses in which even true information is provisional or falsifiable. The prospect that ACMA and digital platform providers will be required to identify not merely misleading facts, but also misleading claims, opinions, commentary and invective will have an obvious chilling effect on freedom of speech, especially in sensitive or controversial areas." The Institute of Public Affairs have highlighted the reliance that social media platforms have on fact-checkers, who they argue failed the nation during the Voice to Parliament referendum. The IPA say they analysed 187 fact-checking articles relating to the Voice of Parliament between 22 May 2022 and the 14th of October 2023. It found an overwhelming 170 articles, or 91% of fact checks, assessed claims made by opponents of the Voice. In this same period, Australian fact checkers assessed just 17 claims made by proponents of the Voice. This is despite over 60% of Australians rejecting the Voice to Parliament on the 14th of October 2023. The IPA notes that 6 months before the referendum, my Nationals colleague, Shadow Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Senator Jacinta Nampijinra-Price, argued that fact-checkers were complicit in perpetuating the false claim that the Voice was a modest proposal. In April 2023, she highlighted the disproportionate targeting of the No campaign, noting the fact-checkers go all out on wrongly fact-checking basic rhetorical claims we've made and then never examine any of these statements from Voice supporters. To be accredited by the IFCN, fact-checkers must uphold a commitment to non-partisanship and fairness and do not concentrate their fact-checking on any one side. As the IPA's research uncovered, Australians can have no confidence that this is the case with domestic fact-checkers. The Australian Christian Lobby said, "The definitions of misinformation and serious harm, together with the threat of severe penalties for digital platform providers who do not comply, are a recipe for over-censorship, where the Australian Communications Media Authority, ACMA, should be safeguarding the free speech of Australians. Instead, they will be requiring digital platforms to control our public discourse. In essence, ACMA becomes the Ministry of Truth." if that doesn't chill you, that you have a problem. From public health to politics to the economy and ideology, ACMA will determine what you are allowed to say online.